The sun hung high in the cloudless sky as Michael Chen stood on his front porch, watching his 16-year-old daughter Aisha prepare to leave for the day. Her dark hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she wore a bright yellow t-shirt with Community Cleanup Crew printed across the front. "Got your water bottle?" Michael asked, leaning against the doorframe. Aisha rolled her eyes good-naturedly. "Yes, Dad, and sunscreen and my phone and extra gloves. Just checking." Michael smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. As one of the city's most respected civil rights attorneys, he'd spent decades fighting injustice in courtrooms, but nothing made him more protective than his only daughter. "I'll be home by 4, Aisha said, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. "We're just cleaning up Riverside Park. No big deal." Michael nodded, watching as she jogged down the driveway to meet her friends waiting at the corner. They were good kids, honor students volunteering on a Saturday when most teenagers would rather be sleeping in or hanging out at the mall. Pride swelled in his chest as he waved one last time before heading back inside. Across town, Officer Kevin Walsh slid into his patrol car, slamming the door with more force than necessary. His mood was already dark and his shift had barely begun. The previous night's argument with his ex-wife about child support payments still rang in his ears, and the department's recent warning about his aggressive approach to policing had left him seething. "Soft," he muttered, adjusting his rearview mirror. "They want us to be social workers now." From the back seat, his K9 partner Rex perked up his ears. The German Shepherd had been with Walsh for 3 years, trained to respond to commands with military precision. Unlike people, Rex never questioned his authority. Walsh's radio crackled to life. "Unit 47, we've got a report of suspicious activity at Riverside Park. Caller says several individuals wearing backpacks are gathering near the south entrance." Walsh grabbed the radio. Unit 47 responding. "Eda, 5 minutes." A smile crossed his face for the first time that day. This was exactly what he needed, some real police work. He'd been assigned to patrol this neighborhood for 8 months now, and he had his own ideas about who belonged there and who didn't. The area had been changing with new families moving in, and Walsh didn't like change. "Ready to work, boy?" he said to Rex, who stood alert in his kennel. The dog's ears perked forward, sensing his handler's shift in energy. At Riverside Park, Aisha and her friends had split into small groups, each taking a section of the sprawling green space. The volunteer coordinator had given them maps, trash bags, and picking tools, sending them off with instructions to meet back at the pavilion by noon. "This place is a mess," said Aisha's friend Tyler, using his trash picker to spear a crumpled fast food wrapper. "People really don't care." "That's why we're here," Aisha replied, already filling her second bag with bottles and food containers. "Make a difference, right?" They worked their way along the jogging path, chatting about upcoming finals and summer plans. None of them noticed the police cruiser that pulled into the south parking lot, or Officer Walsh as he surveyed the park with narrowed eyes. What Walsh saw were groups of teenagers with backpacks, moving in what he considered a suspicious pattern. He didn't notice or chose to ignore their matching yellow t-shirts or the trash bags they were filling. "Dispatch, I've got visual on multiple suspects. Proceeding on foot with K9 backup," Walsh reported, his voice tight with anticipation. "Copy that, Unit 47. Be advised, we only received one call about this. No confirmation of criminal activity." Walsh ignored the caution in the dispatcher's voice. He'd seen enough. Opening the rear door, he clipped a lead to Rex's collar and gave the command for alert status. The dog's body tensed, ready for action. "Police! Don't move!" Walsh shouted as he approached the closest group, Aisha and Tyler, who were kneeling beside a trash can sorting recyclables. Aisha stood up slowly, confusion written across her face. "Officer? Is something wrong?" Walsh's hand moved to his belt. "I said don't move. Hands where I can see them." Tyler raised his hands immediately, the trash picker clattering to the ground. "We're just volunteers, sir. Community cleanup day." "Shut up," Walsh barked, his face flushing red. "Backpacks on the ground now, slowly." Aisha's heart hammered in her chest as she carefully slipped her backpack off. "Officer, we have permission to be here. Our coordinator is just over at the pavilion. If you want to check—" "I said shut up." Walsh cut her off, his voice rising. Rex picked up on his handler's tension, growing more alert, teeth bared slightly. "You think I don't know what you're really doing here?" By now other volunteers had noticed the commotion. Some had stopped to watch while others were pulling out their phones. Aisha noticed this and felt a flicker of relief. Whatever was happening, at least there would be witnesses. "Officer, please." She tried again, her voice steady despite her fear. "We're high school students volunteering for community service hours. We have identification." Walsh's face darkened. In his mind, her calm demeanor was defiance, her reasonable explanation a lie. He'd seen this before, or thought he had. People talking back, questioning his authority. "Last warning," he growled. "On the ground, face down." Tyler was already complying, but Aisha hesitated, confused by the escalation. She started to kneel, saying, "Sir, there's been a misunderstanding." Walsh didn't wait for her to finish. "Rex, apprehend," he commanded, releasing the dog's lead. Several things happened at once. Bystanders screamed as the German Shepherd lunged forward. Aisha raised her arms instinctively. Tyler shouted, "No!" and tried to move between them. The dog's teeth tore into Aisha's forearm as she fell backward onto the grass. Her scream cut through the park like a siren. Walsh made no move to call Rex off immediately, watching with cold eyes as the teenager tried to protect herself. "Help, please," Aisha cried out, tears streaming down her face as she curled into a ball. The dog continued its attack, trained to hold its target until commanded otherwise. It was only when several adult volunteers ran toward them that Walsh finally gave the command for Rex to release. By then, Aisha's yellow shirt was stained with red, her arm mangled by the powerful jaws. "She resisted," Walsh said flatly to the horrified onlookers, as if that explained everything. A woman who had been recording the entire incident stepped forward. "She did not resist. These are kids picking up trash. What is wrong with you?" While someone called an ambulance, Tyler had managed to call Aisha's father. His hands shook as he held the phone, trying to explain what had happened. Miles away, Michael Chen was reviewing case notes in his home office when his phone rang. The moment he heard Tyler's panicked voice, everything else ceased to exist. The words "police," "a dog attack," and his daughter's name sent him racing for his car, legal papers scattering across the floor in his wake. By the time Michael reached the park, paramedics were loading Aisha onto a stretcher. Her face was pale with shock, tears cutting clean tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. The sight of his strong, confident daughter so broken made something primal rise in Michael's chest. "Aisha," he called out, pushing past the yellow police tape that had appeared around the scene. "Sir, you can't," a young officer began, moving to block his path. "That's my daughter," Michael said, his voice dangerously quiet, "and I'm her attorney." The officer hesitated, then stepped aside. Michael reached the ambulance just as they were preparing to close the doors. Aisha's eyes found his, filled with pain and confusion. "Dad," she whispered, "I didn't do anything wrong." "I know, baby," he said, taking her uninjured hand. "I'm right here." Only after ensuring he could ride in the ambulance did Michael turn his attention to the scene behind him. Officer Walsh stood with his K9, looking irritated rather than concerned as a growing crowd of witnesses argued with other responding officers. Their eyes met across the distance. Walsh saw something in Michael's gaze that made him step back, a promise of consequences that went beyond an ordinary complaint. What Walsh didn't know, not yet, was exactly who he had crossed. Michael Chen hadn't spent 20 years fighting civil rights violations to watch his own daughter become another statistic. As the ambulance doors closed, Michael made a silent vow. This would be the last time Officer Walsh ever unleashed a dog on an innocent person. The wheels of justice turned slowly, people often said. But Michael knew how to make them move, and this time it would be personal. The antiseptic smell of the hospital wrapped around Michael like an unwelcome blanket as he sat beside Aisha's bed. Machines beeped steadily, marking each beat of his daughter's heart. Her right arm was heavily bandaged, elevated on a pillow. The doctor had used words like extensive tissue damage and possible nerve injury that made Michael's stomach twist into knots. Aisha had fallen into an uneasy sleep after the pain medication took effect. Michael studied her face, so young, so innocent, and fought to control the rage building inside him. He'd spent his career telling clients to trust the system, to let justice take its course. Now, looking at his injured child, those words felt hollow. His phone buzzed again. The 20th call in 2 hours. News traveled fast in their community, and faster still when someone recorded the entire incident. Michael hadn't watched the videos yet. He couldn't bring himself to see his daughter being attacked, not while sitting here beside her. A soft knock at the door pulled his attention away from Aisha. A nurse poked her head in. "Mr. Chen, there are some people here to see you." "Police officers." Michael's jaw tightened. "Tell them my daughter is resting. Any questions can be directed to my office tomorrow." The nurse nodded sympathetically, but before she could respond, a man in a crisp uniform stepped into view behind her. "Mr. Chen, I'm Captain Rodriguez from Internal Affairs. I understand this is a difficult time, but we need to take your daughter's statement while the events are still fresh." Michael stood slowly, his full height imposing in the small hospital room. "My daughter is 16 years old. She's sedated after having her arm torn apart by your officer's dog. She will not be giving any statements without her attorney present, and I am not emotionally capable of being that attorney right now." Captain Rodriguez had the decency to look uncomfortable. "We're taking this incident very seriously, sir. Officer Walsh has been placed on administrative leave pending—" "Administrative leave," Michael repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "With pay, I assume?" The captain didn't answer, which was answer enough. "Get out," Michael said, "and tell Officer Walsh to enjoy his paid vacation while it lasts." After the police left, Michael stepped into the hallway to collect himself. He pulled out his phone, finally ready to see what everyone else had already witnessed. His finger hovered over the video link a colleague had sent. With a deep breath, he pressed play. The footage was worse than he'd imagined. Filmed by a bystander, it clearly showed Aisha and her friend calmly trying to explain themselves. It showed Officer Walsh's aggressive stance, his hand hovering near his weapon. It showed his deliberate choice to release the dog without justification. Most damning of all, it showed the 3 endless seconds where Walsh watched the attack before calling off his K9. Michael's hands shook as he lowered the phone. The lawyer in him saw a clear-cut case of excessive force. The father in him saw only his baby girl's blood on the grass. His phone rang again. This time it was his law partner, Lisa. "I've seen it," she said without preamble. "The whole firm has seen it. It's everywhere, Michael." "What do you need?" Michael closed his eyes, centering himself. "I need you to file emergency motions first thing tomorrow. Preservation of evidence, all body cam footage, dispatch recordings, Walsh's entire personnel file." "Already drafting them," Lisa replied. "And the press is calling non-stop." "No comment for now," Michael said. "But start a file. Every news report, every social media post. I want everything documented." After hanging up, Michael returned to Aisha's room just as she was starting to stir. "Dad?" Her voice was small, confused. "I'm right here, sweetheart." He took her uninjured hand. "What happened? Why did he—" Her eyes filled with tears. "We were just picking up trash." Michael swallowed hard. "I know, baby. He was wrong. What he did was wrong, and I promise you, he won't get away with it." Across town, Officer Kevin Walsh sat in his darkened living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The TV was on mute, but he could see his own face flashing across the screen as news anchors discussed the disturbing incident at Riverside Park. His phone had been blowing up, mostly colleagues telling him to lawyer up. Walsh took another swig of whiskey. In his mind, he'd done nothing wrong. The kids had been suspicious. The girl hadn't immediately complied. He'd followed his training. Deep down, though, a voice whispered that he'd crossed a line this time. When he closed his eyes, he saw the girl's face, her confusion turning to terror as Rex charged toward her. He saw the yellow volunteer shirt he'd chosen to ignore. His phone rang again. This time it was his union representative. "Walsh, what the hell were you thinking?" The man didn't wait for an answer. "The department's trying to distance themselves already. There's going to be a press conference tomorrow." "They can't throw me under the bus," Walsh protested. "I was responding to a suspicious persons call. From one paranoid old lady who didn't like seeing teenagers in her park," the rep cut in. "And they were clearly volunteers, in matching shirts, picking up trash." Walsh fell silent. "Look," the rep continued, his voice softening slightly. "The union will provide legal representation, but you need to lie low. No social media, no talking to press, and for God's sake, don't go near that family." After hanging up, Walsh poured another drink. His dog Rex whined from his bed in the corner, sensing his handler's distress. "Not now," Walsh muttered. On the TV, the scene changed. Now they were showing a photo of the girl. Aisha Chen, the caption read, smiling in her school photo. Next to it, a picture of her father looking serious in a courtroom. The caption identified him as Michael Chen, civil rights attorney. Walsh's glass slipped from his fingers, spilling whiskey across the floor. The next morning, Michael woke stiff and sore in the hospital chair. Aisha was still asleep, her face peaceful despite everything. A text from Lisa informed him that the police department had scheduled a press conference for 10 a.m. Michael turned on the small TV in the corner of the room, keeping the volume low. He watched as the police chief, flanked by the mayor and other officials, approached a podium crowded with microphones. "Yesterday's incident at Riverside Park is deeply troubling," the chief began, his face grave. "The actions taken by Officer Walsh appear to be inconsistent with our training and policies regarding use of force and K9 deployment." Michael scoffed quietly. "Appear to be? While we complete our internal investigation, Officer Walsh has been placed on administrative leave. We are cooperating fully with the district attorney's office, which will make a determination regarding potential criminal charges." The chief continued with prepared statements about the department's commitment to community trust and accountability. Michael noticed how carefully he avoided any direct apology or admission of wrongdoing. When reporters began shouting questions, the first was predictable. "Has the department reached out to the Chen family?" The chief nodded solemnly. "Representatives from Internal Affairs attempted to speak with the family last night. But as you can imagine, this is a difficult time for them." "That's not what happened," Michael muttered to the screen. The next question hit harder. "Is it true that Officer Walsh has previous complaints of racial bias in his record?" The chief's expression tightened. "We cannot comment on personnel matters during an ongoing investigation. Officer Walsh, like all our officers, receives regular training on implicit bias and appropriate use of force." Michael grabbed his phone and texted Lisa. "Pull every complaint ever filed against Walsh, every performance review, every use of force report." He turned back to the TV just as a reporter asked, "Is the department aware that Aisha Chen's father is prominent civil rights attorney Michael Chen?" The chief's momentary discomfort was telling. "We are aware of Mr. Chen's profession, yes. However, our investigation will be thorough and impartial regardless of who is involved." Michael turned off the TV as Aisha began to stir. Her eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to recognition, then pain as memory returned. "How bad is it, Dad?" she asked, glancing at her bandaged arm. "Really?" Michael took a deep breath. He'd never lied to his daughter, and he wouldn't start now. "The doctor says you'll need surgery. The wounds are deep and there might be some nerve damage, but you're young and strong. With physical therapy, you should regain most function." Aisha nodded, absorbing this. Then, unexpectedly, she asked, "What about the officer? What will happen to him?" Michael studied his daughter's face, seeing concern there despite everything she'd been through. It was this compassion, this fundamental decency that made the attack all the more unjust. "That depends," he said carefully, "on the department, on the evidence, on whether the district attorney decides to file charges. And on you," Aisha added quietly. "You're going to fight this, aren't you?" Michael took her hand. "With everything I have. Not just for you, but for everyone this has happened to who didn't have a lawyer for a dad or videos to prove what happened." Aisha squeezed his hand. Despite the pain and fear of the past 24 hours, her eyes held determination. "Then we fight together." Outside the hospital room, the world was already taking sides. News vans crowded the parking lot. Social media exploded with the hashtag Justice for Aisha. Police supporters were calling it an unfortunate accident, while others saw it as yet another example of systemic bias. But inside that quiet room, a father and daughter made a pact that transcended the noise. This wouldn't just be another viral moment of outrage, forgotten when the next scandal broke. This would be the beginning of real change. As Michael looked at his brave daughter, he made a silent promise. Officer Walsh wouldn't just face his wrath as an angry father. He would face the full force of a system that Michael Chen knew how to navigate better than almost anyone. The battle was just beginning. 3 days after the attack, Michael sat surrounded by stacks of papers in his home office. The familiar smell of coffee and old books usually brought him comfort, but not today. His eyes burned from lack of sleep as he reviewed Officer Walsh's personnel file, a document that had required both legal threats and calling in personal favors to obtain. What he found made his blood boil. 7 previous complaints of excessive force, 4 specifically mentioning racial bias, all dismissed after cursory investigations. Walsh had been transferred twice between precincts, each move following incidents that should have ended his career. Michael rubbed his tired eyes. Down the hall, Aisha was finally sleeping in her own bed after being released from the hospital yesterday. The surgery had gone well, but her recovery would be long. Physical therapy, possible additional surgeries, and those were just the physical wounds. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Turn on Channel 7 now." Michael grabbed the remote and flicked on the small TV in the corner of his office. A reporter stood outside the police station, her expression serious. Sources within the department have provided Channel 7 with exclusive information about Officer Kevin Walsh, the officer involved in the controversial K9 attack on 16-year-old Aisha Chen. According to these sources, Walsh has a spotless record with multiple commendations for bravery. The officer, a 10-year veteran, reportedly feared the teenagers were planting explosive devices disguised as trash. "That's a lie," Michael said to the empty room, his voice tight with anger. The reporter continued. The police union released a statement supporting Officer Walsh, calling the incident an unfortunate misunderstanding during a tense situation. They claim social media has painted an incomplete picture that unfairly portrays Officer Walsh. Michael's phone rang. "It was Lisa again. Are you seeing this?" she demanded without greeting. "I'm seeing it," Michael replied, turning down the volume. "They're trying to control the narrative." "It gets worse," Lisa said. "I've got a source saying they're going to claim Aisha made threatening movements. They'll argue Walsh followed protocol for a potential threat." Michael closed his eyes, fighting to maintain his composure. "They're forgetting the videos. Multiple angles, clear as day. They're hoping people will move on," Lisa said. "Another outrage will come along and everyone will forget about Aisha." "Not this time," Michael said firmly. "I need you to set up a press conference tomorrow and get me a meeting with District Attorney Powell. Today, if possible." After hanging up, Michael pulled out a fresh legal pad. The lawyer in him knew how to fight this battle. Gather evidence, build a case, prepare for every counter-argument. But the father in him wanted to kick down doors and demand justice now. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Dad?" Aisha stood in the doorway, her injured arm in a sling. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, but she looked more alert than she had in days. "Hey, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" Michael got up and guided her to the comfortable chair in the corner. "I saw the news," she said quietly. "They're lying about what happened." Michael nodded. "They're scared. When people are scared, they lie." "I've been thinking," Aisha said, looking more like her confident self than she had since the attack. "I want to tell my side. Not just in court or to the police. To everyone." Michael studied his daughter's face. "You sure about that? Once you step into the public eye, there's no going back. Some people will say horrible things." "They're already saying horrible things," Aisha pointed out. "At least this way I get to speak for myself." Pride swelled in Michael's chest. At 16, his daughter already understood something that had taken him years to learn. Silence rarely served justice. "Okay," he said. "We'll do it together." Across town, Officer Walsh sat in a conference room at police headquarters, surrounded by union representatives and department lawyers. His uniform had been replaced by a sober suit that felt too tight around the collar. "Just stick to the statement we prepared," the union lawyer was saying. "You responded to a suspicious persons call. The subjects failed to comply with direct orders. You deployed your K9 partner according to training." Walsh nodded mechanically. The prepared statement felt hollow in his mouth, but what choice did he have? His entire career, his identity, was on the line. "What about the videos?" he asked. "Everyone can see the girl wasn't threatening me." The lawyer waved this away. "Video doesn't capture everything. Your perspective as the responding officer is what matters. You felt threatened. That's what you'll testify to." Walsh shifted uncomfortably. "And the fact that her father is Michael Chen. Everyone keeps talking about that." The room fell momentarily silent. Finally, the department's legal counsel spoke up. "Mr. Chen has a reputation for being thorough. He doesn't just sue departments. He dismantles them, exposes every flaw, every cover-up, every failure of leadership. That's why we need to present a united front." Walsh felt sweat beading on his forehead. "So I'm the sacrificial lamb?" "I followed my training." "No one's sacrificing anyone," the union rep said soothingly. We stand behind our officers, but you need to understand what we're up against. Chen won't just come after you. He'll come after the whole system. Later that afternoon, Michael sat across from District Attorney Powell, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for political caution. The videos are compelling, Powell admitted, tapping her pen against a closed file. But you know as well as I do that prosecuting officers is complicated. Complicated shouldn't mean impossible, Michael replied evenly. Walsh released his dog on a teenage girl who posed no threat. He watched while the animal attacked her. That's assault with a deadly weapon at minimum. Powell sighed. Michael, we've known each other for 15 years. I respect your work, but you need to understand my position. The police union will fight this tooth and nail. The public is divided. Half the city sees Walsh as a hero. The other half wants his head. And where do you stand? Michael asked quietly. Powell met his gaze. I stand for justice, but justice isn't always straightforward. It is this time, Michael said, sliding a thumb drive across the desk. This contains every complaint ever filed against Walsh. 15 incidents over 10 years. Pattern and practice of targeting minorities. The department buried them all. Powell's eyebrows rose slightly as she picked up the drive. How did you get this? I still have friends in the department. Good cops who are tired of covering for bad ones. Powell tucked the drive into her pocket. I'll review it. That's all I can promise for now. As Michael drove home, his phone rang through the car's speakers. It was a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Chen, this is Dr. Rivera from City Memorial. I was the emergency surgeon who treated your daughter. Michael's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Is everything okay? Has something changed with Aisha's condition? No, the doctor assured him. Your daughter is recovering as expected. I'm calling about something else, something unofficial. Michael pulled over to the side of the road. I'm listening. After treating Aisha, I reviewed other cases involving K9 attacks in our hospital system. There have been 14 in the past 3 years. 8 involved Officer Walsh's dog. Michael felt his pulse quicken. And you're telling me this because... The doctor hesitated. Because 3 of those patients were minors. Because all of them were people of color. And because none of them had the resources to fight back the way you can. Can you share those records with me? Not officially, Dr. Rivera said carefully. But if you were to subpoena them as part of a legal proceeding, I would ensure they weren't misplaced. That evening, Michael and Aisha sat at their kitchen table, picking at the food neighbors had dropped off. The house had been flooded with flowers, cards, and casseroles, expressions of support from a community that had rallied around them. I set up the press conference for tomorrow at 10, Michael said. Just a short statement, then a few questions. We can still cancel if you're not feeling up to it. Aisha shook her head. I need to do this. For myself and for the other people this has happened to. Michael nodded, then shared what he'd learned from Dr. Rivera. 8 other attacks, Aisha repeated, her eyes widening. And they just let him keep doing it? The system protects its own, Michael said. But systems can be changed. That's what my whole career has been about. So what's the plan? Aisha asked, pushing her plate away. I know you have one. Michael smiled slightly. His daughter knew him too well. First we tell your story, your truth. Then we file the most comprehensive civil rights lawsuit this city has ever seen. Not just against Walsh, but against the department, the supervisors who protected him, the internal affairs division that buried complaints. Will it work? Aisha asked. It has to, Michael replied. Because this isn't just about what happened to you anymore. It's about making sure it never happens to anyone else. Later that night, as Michael checked on Aisha before bed, he found her sitting up, scrolling through her phone. You should be resting, he said gently. I found them, she replied, turning the screen toward him. The other victims. They're speaking out online, sharing their stories because of what happened to me. Michael sat on the edge of her bed reading the posts she'd found. People from across the city, sharing similar experiences. Aggressive police encounters, K9 attacks, injuries dismissed as resisting arrest. We're not alone, Aisha said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. Michael wrapped an arm around her shoulders, careful of her injured arm. No, we're not. And neither are they. Not anymore. As Aisha finally drifted off to sleep, Michael stood at her window looking out at the quiet street. Tomorrow would bring cameras, questions, and the beginning of a fight that might take years. But tonight, for the first time since the attack, he felt something besides anger and fear. He felt hope, because systems could be changed, because truth, when spoken loudly enough by enough voices, had power, because his daughter, despite everything, still believed justice was possible. And Michael Chen was going to make sure she was right. Camera flashes popped like lightning as Aisha stepped up to the microphone. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their faces eager for the story. Michael stood protectively at his daughter's side, one hand resting lightly on her back for support. "My name is Aisha Chen," she began, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "5 days ago, I was volunteering at Riverside Park with my friends. We were picking up trash as part of our school's community service program." She paused, taking a deep breath. The bandages on her arm were visible beneath her light jacket, a stark reminder of why they were all gathered here. Officer Kevin Walsh arrived at the park. Without asking questions, without listening to our explanations, he released his police dog on me. Aisha's voice wavered slightly, but she continued. "I was 16 years old, unarmed, wearing a volunteer t-shirt and holding a trash bag. I wasn't running. I wasn't threatening anyone. I was just existing in a public space while being a person of color." The crowd had fallen completely silent. Even the most hardened reporters seemed moved by the teenager's quiet dignity. "Since then, I've learned that I'm not the only one. Officer Walsh has a history of using excessive force, particularly against minorities. His dog has attacked at least 8 other people in the past 3 years. Each time the department has looked the other way." Aisha looked directly into the cameras. "I'm speaking today because silence protects the wrong people. What happened to me was wrong. What happened to others before me was wrong, and it needs to stop." Michael stepped forward as Aisha moved back. "Today we are filing a comprehensive civil rights lawsuit against Officer Walsh, the police department, and city officials who enabled this pattern of abuse. We are also formally requesting that the district attorney file criminal charges for assault." A reporter shouted from the crowd, "Mr. Chen, the police union claims this is just a misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. How do you respond?" Michael's expression remained composed, but his eyes flashed with controlled anger. "I invite anyone who believes this was a misunderstanding to watch the videos. Then ask yourself, if this had been a white teenager in an affluent neighborhood, would a trained attack dog have been unleashed without warning?" Another reporter raised her hand. "Aisha, how has this affected you? Will you be able to return to normal activities?" Aisha stepped back to the microphone. "The doctors say I'll need months of physical therapy. I might never regain full strength in my arm. But the physical injuries aren't the worst part. I have nightmares. I flinch when I see police cars. I'm afraid to go to the park where I've played since I was a little kid." She straightened her shoulders. "But I refuse to let Officer Walsh take my voice. That's why I'm here today." As the press conference ended, Michael guided Aisha through the crowd toward their car. His phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "D.A. Powell wants to meet. 3 p.m. today." Across town, Officer Walsh stared at his TV in disbelief. The press conference was playing on every local channel, with national networks picking up the story as well. His union rep had advised him to avoid watching, but he couldn't look away. The girl seemed so normal, articulate and composed. Nothing like the threatening figure he'd convinced himself he'd encountered in the park. Seeing her speak, putting a human voice to the face that had been haunting him, made something shift uncomfortably in his chest. His phone rang for the 3rd time that hour. This time it was his ex-wife. "Kevin, what the hell?" Her voice was tight with anger. "Our son is being bullied at school because of you. They're calling his dad a racist cop who attacks children." Walsh closed his eyes. He hadn't even thought about how this would affect his 12-year-old son. "Tell him not to worry," he said weakly. "This will all blow over." "Blow over?" she echoed incredulously. "Have you seen the news? Have you seen social media? This isn't going away, Kevin. You need to take responsibility for once in your life." After she hung up, Walsh poured himself a drink, his 3rd of the day despite it being barely noon. Rex whined from his kennel, sensing his handler's distress. "Not now," Walsh muttered. The department had temporarily reassigned the dog to another handler, but had allowed Walsh to keep him at home during the investigation. Another example of the system protecting its own. His doorbell rang. Through the peephole, he could see 2 stern-faced men in suits. Internal Affairs probably, or maybe even FBI. Walsh hesitated, then squared his shoulders and opened the door. "Officer Walsh? I'm Detective Rodriguez from Internal Affairs. This is Agent Patel from the Justice Department's Civil Rights Division. We need to ask you some questions." At the district attorney's office, Michael sat across from D.A. Powell, who looked like she hadn't slept much either. "Your press conference made quite an impression," she said, tapping a pen against her desk. "My phone's been ringing nonstop." "Good," Michael replied simply. "People should be paying attention." Powell nodded, then pulled out a file. "I reviewed the evidence you provided, and I did some digging of my own." She pushed a document across the desk. "This is a warrant for Officer Walsh's arrest on charges of aggravated assault and official misconduct." Michael picked up the paper, scanning it quickly. "When?" "Tonight," Powell said. "I wanted you to know first as a professional courtesy, and because you deserve to be the one to tell Aisha." Michael studied the woman across from him. "What changed your mind? Yesterday you were talking about how complicated this case would be." Powell's professional mask slipped slightly. "I have a 16-year-old daughter too, Michael. And after seeing those other cases," she shook her head. "Some lines shouldn't be crossed, badge or no badge." As Michael drove home, his phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered through the car's speaker. "Mr. Chen? You don't know me, but my name is Greg Walsh. I'm Kevin Walsh's younger brother." Michael's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter," Greg said quickly. "What matters is that I have information you need. About Kevin's history, about cases that were buried, things the department doesn't want anyone to know." "Why would you turn on your own brother?" Michael asked, skepticism clear in his voice. There was a pause. "Because 15 years ago I was a rookie officer who reported my training officer for excessive force against a black teenager. The department closed ranks. They destroyed my career while promoting the guy I reported. Kevin saw what happened to me and made his choice. He decided it was better to be part of the system than to fight it. And now I'm watching history repeat itself," Greg said quietly. "I can't change what my brother did to your daughter, but I can help make sure he's the last one who gets away with it." Michael pulled over to the side of the road. "I'm listening." By early evening, the news of Walsh's impending arrest had leaked to the media. Reporters camped outside the Chen home, hoping for a comment. Inside, Michael and Aisha sat in the living room, processing the day's developments. "Will he actually go to jail?" Aisha asked, curled up on the couch with a cup of tea. "It's just an arrest for now," Michael explained. "There will be a bail hearing, then pretrial motions, then the trial itself. It's a long process, but it's a start," Aisha said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "What about the lawsuit?" "That's moving forward too. And with Greg Walsh's evidence?" Michael shook his head in amazement. "He has internal memos showing the department knew about the pattern of excessive force for years. They kept transferring Walsh rather than disciplining him." Aisha's phone buzzed with a notification. "Dad, look at this." She held up the screen, showing a social media post that was rapidly gaining attention. It was a statement from a group identifying themselves as officers within the department, calling for reform and accountability. "We cannot stand by while the actions of officers like Walsh erode public trust," the statement read. "We became police to protect our communities, not to terrorize them. We support the charges against Officer Walsh and call for a transparent review of all excessive force complaints." "They're breaking ranks," Michael said, surprised. "That almost never happens." "Maybe things are finally changing," Aisha suggested. The doorbell rang, interrupting their conversation. Michael checked the security camera and was surprised to see Tyler, Aisha's friend who had been with her during the attack. "I brought the stuff you asked for," Tyler said when Michael opened the door. He handed over a thumb drive. "All the unedited footage from everyone who was recording that day, plus statements from the other volunteers." "Thanks, Tyler," Michael said, placing a hand on the young man's shoulder. "You've been a real friend through all this." Tyler glanced past Michael to where Aisha sat on the couch. "How is she?" "Getting stronger every day," Michael replied. "Do you want to come in?" Tyler nodded, and soon he and Aisha were talking quietly while Michael reviewed the new footage in his office. One video in particular caught his attention. Taken from an angle he hadn't seen before, it clearly showed Walsh's face during the attack. The expression there wasn't fear or confusion. It was contempt. Michael's phone rang again. It was Lisa. "They're executing the arrest warrant now," she said without preamble. "But there's a complication. Walsh is gone. What do you mean, gone? His house is empty. Car's missing. He must have gotten tipped off about the warrant. Michael felt a chill run down his spine. What about the dog? Also gone, Lisa confirmed. The department is calling it a betrayal. They're distancing themselves already, saying Walsh has violated the public trust twice now. After hanging up, Michael sat in silence for a moment, thinking. Then he returned to the living room, where Aisha and Tyler were watching the news coverage of Walsh's disappearance. Are you worried? Aisha asked, seeing her father's expression. Michael sat down beside her. A little. But he can't run forever, and in some ways this makes our case stronger. The department can't defend him now. What happens next? Tyler asked. Michael looked at the two teenagers, so young and yet already learning hard lessons about justice and its imperfections. Next, we keep fighting, he said simply. Not just for justice for Aisha, but for real change. Greg Walsh is willing to testify about the department's culture of protection. The other victims are coming forward. Even officers within the department are speaking up. Aisha leaned against her father's shoulder. Do you think we can really make a difference? Michael wrapped an arm around his daughter, careful of her injuries. Look at what you've already done. One voice speaking truth can start a movement. And movements change the world. Outside, the evening news vans continued their vigil, their lights illuminating the darkness. Inside, a father and daughter prepared for the next battle in a war they hadn't chosen, but were determined to win. It wasn't just about one officer anymore. It was about a system that needed to change, and the unexpected alliance of people now willing to fight for that change. And somewhere in the darkness, Kevin Walsh was running, not yet realizing that there was nowhere left to hide. The truth, once exposed, has a power all its own, and its light was spreading. 3 weeks had passed since Officer Walsh disappeared. Autumn leaves crunched beneath Michael's feet as he walked through the courthouse plaza, briefcase in hand. Today marked the first major hearing in their civil lawsuit against the police department. Though Walsh himself remained a fugitive, the case against the system that had protected him was moving forward. Michael paused at the courthouse steps, looking back at Aisha, who was walking alongside her physical therapist, Diane. His daughter's arm was out of the sling now, and she was working daily to regain strength and mobility. The physical wounds were healing faster than expected. The emotional ones would take longer. Ready? He asked as they reached him. Aisha nodded, determination in her eyes. Let's do this. Inside the courtroom, Michael wasn't surprised to see every seat filled. What did surprise him was the diversity of the crowd. Not just reporters and activists, but ordinary citizens, off-duty officers, even a group of teenagers wearing the same yellow volunteer shirts Aisha had worn on that fateful day. Lisa met them at the plaintiff's table, her expression cautiously optimistic. They've asked for a meeting in the judge's chambers before we start, she whispered. Sounds like they might be ready to talk settlement. Michael raised an eyebrow. After all their tough talk about fighting this to the end? Walsh going AWOL changed the equation, Lisa explained. Plus, Greg Walsh gave an interview yesterday. He named names, Michael. High-ranking officials who covered up complaints. The department's in damage control mode. Judge Rivera, a stern woman with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for fairness, called the attorneys to her chambers. Michael squeezed Aisha's hand before following Lisa through the side door. Inside, the city attorney and police department counsel sat stiffly around a small conference table. Their faces showed the strain of the past weeks, the public outcry, the Justice Department investigation, the internal rebellion from officers tired of protecting bad actors. Counselors, Judge Rivera began, I understand there may be potential for resolution without proceeding to trial. The city attorney cleared his throat. Yes, Your Honor. The city is prepared to offer a settlement that includes monetary compensation, policy changes, and an official apology. Michael leaned forward. What kind of policy changes? For the next hour, they negotiated terms. Michael pushed for specific reforms, independent oversight of K9 deployments, body cameras that couldn't be turned off, transparent disciplinary procedures, mandatory reporting of excessive force. When they finally returned to the courtroom, Michael took a moment to explain the proposed settlement to Aisha. They're offering $5 million, he said quietly. But more importantly, they're agreeing to every policy change we demanded. Aisha considered this. What about the other victims? The ones who came forward after me? There's a provision for a victim's compensation fund, Michael explained, and they've agreed to reopen all complaints against Walsh and other officers with similar patterns. And the officers who looked the other way? Aisha pressed. What happens to them? Michael smiled slightly at his daughter's persistence. The settlement includes a commitment to an independent review of command staff. Those who failed to act will face consequences. Aisha nodded slowly. Then I think we should accept. As the settlement terms were read into the court record, Michael watched the reactions around the room. Relief from the city officials, vindication from activists, and from Aisha, a quiet dignity that made his heart swell with pride. Outside, they faced a wall of cameras and microphones. Michael stepped up to speak first. Today marks a beginning, not an end. The settlement we've reached includes significant policy changes that will help prevent future abuses of power. But real change requires more than signatures on legal documents. It requires a fundamental shift in how we think about policing and community safety. He stepped back and Aisha moved forward. In the weeks since the attack, she had become an unexpected voice for change, her quiet strength resonating with people across the country. When I was attacked, I felt powerless, she began. But then I realized that speaking up gave me back my power. To everyone who has experienced injustice and stayed silent out of fear, your voice matters. Your story matters. As they made their way through the crowd, a police officer in uniform approached them. Michael tensed instinctively, moving closer to Aisha. Miss Chen, the officer said, his expression solemn. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what happened to you. Many of us are. We became officers to protect people, not harm them. Aisha studied him for a moment, then nodded. Thank you for saying that. Change has to come from inside, too. Later that evening, as Michael was preparing dinner, his phone rang with a call from Captain Rodriguez, the internal affairs officer who had been leading the search for Walsh. We found him, Rodriguez said without preamble. Small motel just across the state line. Anonymous tip led us there. Michael set down the knife he'd been using to chop vegetables. And the dog? Also recovered unharmed. Local animal control has him. Was Walsh arrested? Michael asked. Yes, Rodriguez confirmed. He surrendered without incident. Seemed almost relieved, to be honest. He's being transported back now to face charges. After hanging up, Michael shared the news with Aisha, who received it with unexpected calmness. I'm glad they found him, she said simply. Not just for me, but for him too. Running wasn't going to fix anything. Michael marveled at his daughter's capacity for compassion, even toward the man who had hurt her so badly. 2 days later, they sat in District Attorney Powell's office, discussing the criminal case against Walsh. He's willing to plead guilty, Powell explained. Aggravated assault, official misconduct, civil rights violations. He'll serve time, probably 3 to 5 years with good behavior. That doesn't seem like enough, Michael said, frustration evident in his voice. Powell leaned forward. He's also agreed to testify against the superior officers who enabled him. And he's providing details about other incidents that were covered up. This goes beyond just one bad officer, Michael. This could help us clean up the entire department. Aisha, who had been quiet during the meeting, finally spoke. I want to talk to him. Both adults turned to her in surprise. Aisha, you don't have to do that, Michael said gently. I know I don't have to. I want to. Her voice was firm. Not for him. For me. After much discussion and against his better judgment, Michael agreed to a supervised meeting. The next morning, they entered a small conference room at the courthouse where Walsh waited, handcuffed and dressed in an orange jumpsuit. He looked smaller somehow, diminished without his uniform and authority. Aisha sat across from him, her father at her side. For a long moment, neither spoke. Why? Aisha finally asked. One simple word that contained worlds of hurt. Walsh couldn't meet her eyes at first. When he finally looked up, his face showed something Michael hadn't expected. Genuine remorse. I could give you excuses, Walsh said, his voice rough. The culture I worked in. The things I was taught. The pressure to be tough. But the truth is simpler and harder to admit. He paused. I stopped seeing people as people. Especially people who didn't look like me. When did that start? Aisha asked. Walsh shook his head slowly. So gradually I didn't notice. Each time I crossed a line and nothing happened, it became easier to cross the next one. And now? Michael asked. Now I've lost everything, Walsh said. My job, my freedom, my son's respect. He looked directly at Aisha. I can't undo what I did to you. I can only say I'm sorry, and that I'll spend every day trying to make amends. Aisha studied him for a long moment. I don't forgive you, she said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hope you mean what you say about making amends. As they left the courthouse, Michael noticed Aisha seemed lighter somehow, as if setting down a heavy burden. You okay? He asked as they walked to the car. She nodded. I needed to see him as a person. Not as a monster, not as a symbol. Just a flawed human who did a terrible thing. 6 months later, Michael stood at the back of a community center auditorium, watching with pride as Aisha addressed a crowd of students, activists, and community members. Her right arm still showed scars from the attack, but she moved with confidence as she gestured to emphasize her points. Real change happens in 3 places, she was saying. In courtrooms, yes. In policy documents, yes. But most importantly in hearts and minds, in the way we see each other. The Youth Justice Coalition she had founded was already making an impact, bringing together students, community leaders, and reform-minded officers to rebuild trust and create new approaches to public safety. In the months since the settlement, the city had implemented every promised reform. Walsh had begun serving his prison sentence. Several high-ranking police officials had resigned or been fired. The department was under new leadership committed to transparency and accountability. Michael's phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. Just got word. Justice Department is using our case as a model for consent decrees in 3 other cities. He smiled as he typed his response. 1 case at a time. As Aisha finished her speech to enthusiastic applause, Michael reflected on the journey they had taken. A single act of injustice born from bias and unchecked power had caused tremendous pain, but it had also sparked a movement for change that was rippling outward in ways no one could have predicted. Aisha stepped down from the podium and made her way through the crowd toward him, stopping to speak with people along the way. She moved differently now, not with the carefree bounce of before, but with purpose and awareness that belied her 17 years. Ready to go home? Michael asked when she reached him. Aisha smiled, linking her arm through his. Actually, I promised to meet with the student organizers about next month's community dialogue. Can you wait a bit longer? Michael nodded, his heart full as he watched his daughter return to the group of eager young activists waiting for her. The path to healing, both personal and communal, was long and imperfect. There would be setbacks and disappointments along the way. But today, in this room filled with people committed to doing the hard work of change, Michael allowed himself to feel something that had been in short supply. Hope. Not a naive hope that ignored reality, but a determined hope that acknowledged how far they had come and how far they still had to go. A hope that recognized that systems built by humans could be remade by humans, especially when they worked together. Take all the time you need, he called after Aisha. I'll be right here.